Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another episode of After the Buzzer, the show where I recap the NBA games from the night. We had some play in action tonight, our first taste of postseason basketball, and it was pretty fun. The first game of the night, Lakers versus Pelicans in that 7-8 matchup, winner going on to face the Nuggets, was incredible. One of the best games of the entire season. And then following that, we had Warriors versus Kings, which felt like it was also going to be a banger. I mean, last year, you think back to the playoffs, where these two teams had maybe the best series of the entire postseason, definitely the best one of the first round. It went to 7 games, and it took a Steph Curry 50-piece masterclass to knock off Sacramento in their home building. I feel like we could see a bit more of that drama here, with both teams fighting to keep their season alive. Unfortunately, it was not a good game. This game was a blowout for a majority of it, and it was the Sacramento Kings who were destroying the Golden State Warriors, decimating them without Malik Monk or Kevin Huerter, two players that are really important to their success. The Kings led for the entire game outside of the first 4 to 5 minutes. The Warriors brought it back a little bit at the end of the second quarter, beginning of the third quarter. Kings very quickly pushed the lead up to 15 by the end of the third, and they kept it above 10 for almost the entire fourth quarter, eventually blowing the lid off the building and winning by 24 points, lighting the beam, getting the, I believe the broadcast said, biggest win by the Kings over the Golden State Warriors since 2006, which was like 20 years ago almost. It was a statement from this Kings team. Keegan Murray was insane, 32 points and 9 boards, drilling 8 threes. Keon Ellis played one of the best games he's ever had with 15, 4, 5, 3, and 3, clamping up on the perimeter against Steph Curry or Klay Thompson, getting these big-time hustle plays, knocking down some open shots. Keon Ellis has really become one of my favorite role players in the league with what he's done in Sacramento this season. De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis had good games too. Fox shot 24, 4, 6, and 2. Sabonis had 16, 12, 7, 2, and 1. And like I said, they really held up despite the absence of two of their most important wing players, their 6th man in particular, Malik Monk. It really didn't matter. They kept the team together, they stayed focused, and like I said, absolutely obliterated Golden State. And with this, the Golden State Warriors fall short. They end up losing in the play-in. It's the second time they've done so since the induction of it, and they don't make the playoffs for the first time, where you have Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green all playing serious time throughout the season since the dynasty began back in like 2015. In 2020, you had no Steph or Klay Thompson for basically the whole year, where they won like 20 games or so. In 2021, Klay missed the entire season. That was the year where Steph tried to will them to the playoffs, but ultimately they did fall in the play-in tournament. But this season, other than the Draymond Green suspension and a couple games missed by some of their supporting guys, they had the big three healthy and available for a majority of the season. They just failed to make the playoffs, and in this play-in game, they went out sad. Steph Curry went out there and had a decent game with 22 points, shot decently efficiently, but he had 6 turnovers, and really was just not enough of a factor to give him a win. Draymond Green had 12 points, but had 3 turnovers, and it wasn't his best defensive game. Klay Thompson had perhaps his worst game ever as a Golden State Warrior, considering the stakes where they had to keep their season alive, and he shot over 10 from the field for 0 points. You watching this video and I had the same amount of points that Klay Thompson did in tonight's playing game. That's abysmal. Andrew Wiggins struggled like he has all season. Kuminga was all right. Some of the young guys played well, but nobody played that great. And watching them lose, it truly felt like I just witnessed the end of the dynasty. Everybody could feel it. People on my timeline were celebrating, saying that this was the end of the Golden State Warriors. They can't dominate the NBA anymore. The dynasty is finally over. And it really does feel like that, especially because Klay Thompson, who was just terrible, is going to be a free agent this offseason, which could potentially, for the first time in a decade, break up the big three of Steph, Klay, and Draymond, who have led them to all their success up to this point. After the game, Steve Kerr was asked about the Klay Thompson situation. He said he wants Klay back. He thinks they need him back. He's still got a lot of good years left. Draymond Green said he wants him back. It makes sense. They've won a number of championships with this guy. Of course, they want him to be here for the long term. But at the same time, this is a team that's clearly nowhere near good enough to compete. There was very few moments, if any, throughout the season where I truly felt like this Golden State Warriors squad had a real chance to compete in the Western Conference. I know they started off kind of hot at the beginning of the season, so maybe one of those moments I believed in them a little bit, but they never felt like a significant threat. The team is old. They're on these 2 different timelines. Their star players are aging and regressing, and Klay Thompson is a big symptom of their failure this season. While he had some great moments, he has been wildly inconsistent over the past couple of years. He is nowhere near the defender he used to be. He still does not have great shot selection, and previously it was fine because Klay could knock down those looks, but now he can't hit them as often, and so it falls apart. Steph really just had no consistent second option at all this season. That guy used to be Klay Thompson, and if Klay's demanding a large amount of money on the open market, which I do expect him to do, I'm sure he still sees himself as an impact player, and I think there are a number of teams that could pay him that type of money. Can the Golden State Warriors justify giving him what he may ask for in the market, especially because they have to make so many moves to make this team better? They're so far away, and any significant amount of money tied up in Klay further handicaps them financially. They've got to find ways to make moves. Like, if you sign Klay Thompson back, you may just be kind of locked into what you have. Like, this was the most expensive team in the NBA already this season, and they didn't even make it out of the play-in tournament. Additionally, there were two moments today that really stood out to me. Number one, before the game, Klay was being interviewed and was asked about his upcoming free agency, if that creeps into his mind at all, and he said, no, not really, but noted that he is appreciative of his time as a Golden State Warrior, which felt kind of on the fence and somewhat final. Then after the game, Klay Thompson, while all of his teammates started to walk to the back, he started walking but then turned around, stood on the court, and kind of just took everything in. I don't know if he was just trying to internalize that feeling, kind of try to motivate him going forward like some athletes do after they lose the Super Bowl, the NBA Finals, or something like that. But it did kind of feel like he was just taking in his last moments potentially as a Golden State Warrior. So moments like this, combined with the financial problems that the Warriors have with bringing Klay Thompson back, make me feel like we may have very well seen the last time that this super successful, one of the most successful of all time big threes, just played their final game together. It's surreal because these three guys have been at the center of a ton of massive NBA moments throughout these past 9 years. They've been a dynasty, and now it feels like this is truly the end. In this moment, the Golden State Warriors have finally fallen apart. Not to mention, whether he walks or stays, there's still so much else up in the air. Like, what do you do about Andrew Wiggins going forward? He's making a ton of money still over the next 2 seasons, over $30 million, and has massively underperformed since he was huge for them in that 2022 finals run. He became an all-star. Last year was a bit rough. This year was even worse. Like, what do you do with this contract? He probably has no value at this point making that amount of money. Do you hold on to Draymond Green, who's still really good, don't get me wrong, but he spent a lot of the season getting suspended, getting ejected. He just can't seem to keep himself in check. And I guess it got better towards the end of the season, but it is still a bit of a concern. And he's making a lot of money too. He can continue to regress over the next few years. What do you do about a guy like Kevon Looney, who's been a staple of your team for a while, but really struggled this season? And most importantly of all, with all these decisions in mind, how do you salvage this thing to try and help Steph Curry compete? Because unless you plan on trading him, the Warriors owe it to Steph Curry to make this team better. After the game, Steph Curry was asked about the future of him, Draymond, and Klay going forward, and he gave a somewhat detailed answer, basically talking about how much he's enjoyed playing alongside them and how they do need to have some tough conversations this summer. He knows that, but ultimately his final response was, I just want to win. And I completely understand that, because part of the reason the Warriors are in this position in the first place, where it feels like it's all ending, things are crumbling down, is because the front office has not done enough to win, has not done enough to build around Steph Curry over the past few years. And I've made videos complaining about this in the past. Like, they did nothing at the deadline this year. That's crazy. They felt like they could be very, very involved, whether they trade Andrew Wiggins or Chris Paul, maybe even Klay Thompson if they really want to go crazy. They had young players they could go ahead and flip for supporting pieces. Like, there's so many different ways they could build this team out around Steph Curry. They've been trying this 2 timelines thing for a while. Nothing has worked. They have done anything but give Steph Curry a reliable supporting cast to help him compete, and they owe it to Steph, who is the greatest Warrior of all time, is one of the top 10, 12 players in NBA history, one of the best players to ever play the game. He wants to be a Warrior for life. They have to do something to help him compete in some way, whether it's trying to trade for a better supporting star next to him, it's just adding pieces at the deadline, doing anything really. They just have not done nearly enough to go ahead and help him. It's crazy to me because nobody thought this team was a contender by the time the deadline rolled around, and they still didn't do anything. Now, I'm not saying that Steph Curry is completely blameless, because he shoulders the blame as the team's best player. He was not great tonight. He had a bunch of turnovers, and in the second half of the season post All-Star break was not the usual Steph Curry we know, just around 23 points per game on 42% shooting. It's not ideal. You definitely want him to be better, and it was one of the rougher ends to a season we've seen from him. However, at the same time, he is 36 years old and still being asked to heavily carry a wildly inconsistent roster on a night-to-night basis. That is very unrealistic at this point. Steph is regressing, and it happens to everybody. The fact that he is still this good at 36 years old as a small guard is an absolute miracle. He's fought off father time better than most, but it catches up to everybody. You cannot try and run this thing back. I pray that they don't. If you bring back Klay Thompson, it has to be on a cheap deal, and you still have to make a bunch of changes to the roster. But at the same time, I don't know how you bring this thing back to a championship-level team, because sure, you have some interesting young players like Podziemski and Kuminga, Moses Moody, for example, Trace Jackson Davis, so You could deal some of those guys, maybe tie some of them to Andrew Wiggins' contract, try and get a top-level player, but I'm not sure who's going to be available, and I don't think that trade package beats a lot of the other ones you're going to see around the league. Our star players are going to want to come to the Golden State Warriors when it feels like they're on the decline in the first place. I'm not really sure what the path forward is. I know they have to do something, but the clear option, the clear answer isn't exactly there, because also at the same time, with Steph and this core getting older, I'm sure they don't want to trade all of their young pieces. They have to find some type of balance. They're one of the most interesting spots in the entire NBA going into this offseason. And for the first time in a decade, it really does feel like this iteration of the Warriors are dead. I don't know what changes they're going to make, but something has to happen. They have to look in the mirror. And I think it begins with admitting to themselves that the dynasty as we know it is over. Real quick here at the end of the video, I do also want to go ahead and cover this Lakers-Pelicans game because it was way too fun for me to not talk about. This was way better as an overall game. The Pelicans started off hot behind Zion Williamson, playing out of his mind. The Lakers took back the lead and went up by as much as 18 in the third quarter, actually, and it started to feel like it was slipping away from New Orleans, and the Lakers, who were favored going into this, were going to decimate them like they did in Game 82 of the season. But Zion Williamson had something to say about it. He went out there, and in his first ever postseason game, he had the best game of his career. 40 points, 11 rebounds, 5 assists, a steal, and a block on 63% shooting. It's made even more impressive because Brandon Ingram is continuing to rehab, so he didn't play that much in this game and didn't look great when he was out there. CJ McCollum was awful. They were basically keying in on Zion Williamson. They knew the only guy that could beat them was Zion, and he was still unstoppable going up against a Lakers team that feels like they're pretty well built to slow a guy like him down. He was just getting downhill, finishing over anybody and everybody. He was throwing down dunks, these crazy layups. I don't know how he hangs in the air so long and has so much touch for a guy his size. He had 20 points on 8 of 12 shooting in the second half and made a shot at the rim with 3:19 left to go ahead and tie the game up. It felt like the Pelicans had all the momentum. They were going to go ahead and win this one. But after that bucket, he landed and kind of grimaced and immediately went back to the locker room, threw down a towel, and didn't come back. And immediately the Lakers went on a quick run and ultimately closed out the game, advancing to the playoffs to go ahead and take on Denver in the 2-7 matchup. D'Lo had 21 and 6. Anthony Davis against his former team had 20 points, 15 rebounds, and 3 blocks. LeBron James had 23, 9, 9, 2, and 2. Shooting splits weren't great, but overall still a pretty impactful game. Rui Hachimura had 13 points. Gabe Vincent, shout out to him, had 9 points, a big spurt. Around the halftime mark, if I remember correctly, Austin Reeves had 16, 5, and 6. It was a team effort. They needed this game. I know there were some people that were saying, oh, maybe they could tank to try and face Oklahoma City in the first round. As a Thunder fan, I'm telling you, wouldn't have been a great idea in the first place. And also, there is no way the Lakers were ever going to play with the fire that is trying to, tempt the basketball gods and lose on purpose a game that would put you in a win-or-go-home scenario against the Kings, who have had their number, or the Golden State Warriors. There was no way they were going to do that. They did enough to go ahead and win this game, even though they almost blew it. And again, it sets up a pretty interesting rematch from last year between them and the Denver Nuggets. As for the Pelicans, it really felt like they might have had this if not for the Zion injury. Shams is reporting that it's a hamstring and that he walked out of the arena without that much of a limp, but it is going to require some tests getting done, and we're not sure if he's going to be able to play going into their next playing game on Friday. So that's very concerning, because to beat the Sacramento Kings team, even though they've got injuries, they need Zion Williamson, because Brandon Ingram is absolutely not himself quite yet coming back from that massive injury, and CJ McCollum has shown a couple of times recently that he's not really this big time performer, at least not here with the Pelicans, it seems. Kings-Pelicans should be a fun wrap-up to the Western Conference play-in tournament. I can't wait to see those teams battle, especially if Zion is playing. If he's not, it's going to be pretty tough for the Pelicans, but I think if he's back, New Orleans should go ahead and win and grab that 8 seed. We'll have to wait and see for the moment, though. I think that's all I've got to say about these games. Let me know what you thought about them. Specifically, let me know what you think about the Golden State Warriors. Where do they go from here? What would you do if you were them in the offseason? Would you start a rebuild? How would you retool around Steph Curry if you plan to do that? Would you keep Klay Thompson, let him walk? What do you think his value is on the market? What about with like Draymond Green and Andrew Wiggins? A lot of questions on the table for them, but ultimately, do you think that the Golden State Warriors have won their last ring in the Steph Curry era, or do you think there is still a chance they could go ahead and grab another one? They just have to make the right moves. I appreciate y'all watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. There's going to be a lot of playoff coverage coming up here. There's already been a bunch, so definitely don't want to miss out on that. It's coming basically every single day. But anyways, I appreciate y'all watching. I'll see y'all later. Real one, stay back.